EcoCycle's Zero Waste video series. Last week we talked about why recycling is important, and this week we're going to talk about what can be recycled. Did you know that what I can recycle in my curbside bin here in Boulder County might be different from what someone can recycle in Austin, Texas, or even in nearby Denver? That's because recycling guidelines change from place to place. So why aren't recycling practices the same everywhere we go? Can't we just make universal recycling guidelines for what can be recycled and put universal recycling signage on recycling bins and put a universal symbol on all recyclable containers? Problem solved, right? Unfortunately, it's not that easy. Whether something is recyclable does change from community to community, and that's because what is or isn't recyclable in your area depends on three things. 1, is there a local facility that can process that material? 2, is there a dependable, accessible market for the material? And 3, will that market pay enough for the material to cover the costs of collecting, processing, and transporting it? Let's take a closer look at each of these factors. 1, local facilities. This refers to the actual recycling facility and the sorting equipment and technology that it may or may not have. It also refers to the infrastructure involved in recycling collection. So if we're talking about recycling a plastic bottle, for example, we need to think about, do we have trucks to collect the bottles, or do we have a drop-off center where people bring their bottles? How far away is the nearest recycling center that processes recyclables for market? If it's many miles away in another part of the state, that carries a significant additional financial burden for the program, which is a huge issue for rural communities. At that recycling center, do they have an economically feasible way to sort number 1 bottles from number 2 jugs and separate them from all the other materials? For example, do they have lasers or hand sorters? Now let's turn to markets. It's one thing for us to be able to collect and sort recyclables, but then someone has to actually buy them to physically turn them into something new. Whoever is buying that material from the recycler is called the market. And that brings us to criteria number 3, the market's value of a recyclable. There are, of course, costs involved in collecting the material, sorting it at a facility, and shipping the material to the market to make it into something new. The market needs to be paying a price for recyclable materials that will cover those costs and have at least some profit margin for the recycler. These 3 things vary widely from place to place, and that's why recycling guidelines are different from place to place. And that's why the concept of creating universal recycling guidelines isn't possible right now. There are some general commonalities around the materials accepted in a community if they have recycling services. Most programs, even if they're very rural, will accept aluminum cans, steel cans, and corrugated cardboard. That's because these materials are usually valuable enough to pay for themselves. The closer you are to a large city, the more materials are added to that basic list. So, how do you know what's recyclable for you? Knowing what is or isn't recyclable where you live is extra confusing because of the prolific use of the recycling symbol on so much packaging out there. Much of it is stuff that isn't really recyclable anywhere. For example, you'll find the recycling symbol on almost all plastics, but actually, most plastics out there aren't recyclable. Right now, we can't control who puts the recycling symbol on their product. And as we've learned, recycling guidelines change from place to place. So if I have a yogurt tub and I'm looking for a label to tell me whether or not it's recyclable, that yogurt tub doesn't know whether I'm in Boulder County or rural Australia. So while it may be recyclable here, that doesn't mean it's recyclable everywhere. So the best way to know what's recyclable in your area isn't to look to the product to tell you. You should look to your local guidelines from your hauler, your local recycler, or your community's government. If you recycle in Boulder County, here are the basics of our recycling guidelines. Let's start with paper. Here are some paper items that you can recycle here in Boulder County: cardboard, paperboard, office paper, and open junk mail, magazines, and newspaper. Some things we don't want are low-grade papers like tissues, paper towels, paper napkins, beater-dyed paper, which means that it's a piece of paper that's very bright or very dark, food packaging except cartons, and paper smaller than 2 inches, like paper shred. We can also take some non-plastic containers like cartons, aluminum drink cans, steel food cans, and glass bottles and jars. On the cartons, the little caps can stay on, but on a jar, please take the lid off. Labels are okay on all of these containers, and we just want to make sure that they're all empty of food and liquid. We can also take some plastic containers. If it's plastic and it's a bottle, tub, jug, or jar, we can take it in Boulder County. The screw-on caps are fine to stay on the container as long as it's plastic on plastic. We can also take plastic clamshells and takeout containers as long as they're not compostable, paper, or styrofoam. A new addition to our recycling guidelines in Boulder County are tub lids, which can go through by themselves. Again, please make sure that all of these containers are empty of food and liquid before putting them in your bin. We can also take some durable plastics here in Boulder County, such as flower pots, buckets, and rigid six-pack holders. There you have it. If there's still an item you're unsure about, check EcoCycle's guidelines at www.ecocycle.org. You can also call our recycling hotline or email us, or get this info at your fingertips with EcoCycle's A to Z Recycling Guide app, available at www.ecocycle.org, or download it to your phone and you can look up where to recycle, compost, or reuse hundreds of items. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week.